Hello and welcome to Bayonne today. I'm so happy to be back with you, sharing one of Bayonne's finest treasures. Sitting next to me is my friend, Linda Hockstein, actually Linda Hockstein Esquire. She's here today to tell us a little bit about her own business, but a lot about her family and her family heritage here in Bayonne. Hockstein is a name that's been in Bayonne since the turn of the century, and by that I mean the 1900s. Linda?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you so much for being part of Bayonne today.
Thank you so much.
You're part of Bayonne today. Your family's been part of Bayonne yesterday, the Bayonne of the past, and of course we're hoping more and more to see you in the future. You just redid your office space over at 660 Broadway.
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what brought that about?
I turned out that I've been in the space about 17 years.
Okay.
I have a solo practice. I started in 1996, and I wanted to be really proud of the space. I wanted to invest in my practice, invest in Bayonne, and about 6 months ago I started the project, renovated the entire space, and we're really proud of it. We're really proud of it.
And speaking of your practice, what type of law do you do?
I do mostly real estate
Okay.
and personal injury work.
Okay. And the space itself has a whole new look. I mean, I remember when you were in the front, and then there was another office in the back, and now you've taken over the entire space. Beautiful hardwood floors and lots of very interesting colors. The furniture everything is different. So it's interesting to see a Broadway store / business / family reinvesting back in the town and showing us, giving us a feeling of, I feel, being very positive about your future here.
We really wanted the space to have a modern feel and not an outdated feel. I feel that Bayonne has a lot of promise and that we want to instill this feeling of newness and freshness. And I think one of the interesting parts of the office is that I got a bunch of Bayonne prints that are historically all Bayonne. There's actually even a Bayonne, France print.
Yes.
And we superimposed them, and we had a designer work on them and also an artist work on them. And a lot of the pictures that are now in the office are Bayonne highlights from way back in time, of Bayonne Bridge, of the DeWitt Theater, really historical, the Bayonne Park, historical themes, and that's really nice to come into the space and not only have this newness, but also the nostalgia of Bayonne, because it's so important to me, and it's where my father's history is.
Exactly, and that's a perfect segue to take us right into the first Hockstein, who was your great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather.
Okay, great-grandpa Joe.
Right, Joseph Hockstein.
Joseph Hockstein. We found some super interesting things about him today alone from Linda's dad, Donald. He shared with us so much of the Hockstein history that we were amazed that he remembered as much as he did remember. Your great-grandfather arrived in Bayonne. He was living in New York. He was from, I would imagine it was Manhattan.
Well, he was an immigrant.
Okay.
And he came over to New York first, and he was a builder, and he was working in Bayonne. And in order to get to Bayonne, he was taking a horse and buggy to get here to try and support his family, and they were living in Manhattan at the time.
A boat and a horse.
A boat and a
horse
horse
and buggy. Okay.
And he was having all of the work here, and it was so difficult transportation-wise to get here every day that he decided to move his family here. And he moved in, I believe, 1902, and he moved here, and he became a builder, and he built the DeWitt Theater.
Yes.
He started off on small projects and small buildings, and then it evolved into theaters.
Because the motion picture, your dad told us the motion picture industry had just started to develop. And of course, there was a need for theaters. And he arrived in Bayonne at a time when there weren't any theaters, and was responsible for building the DeWitt. Your dad told us the Bijou, the Strand, and also the Opera House, which is right over where ShopRite is now. So that is a very interesting part of your history, knowing that your great-grandfather was a part of that kind of development. And now none of those theaters exist, but we have now Frank's over on the in the South Cove Commons.
Yes.
And obviously people are still looking at movies and watching movies, but it's not the way it was back then. But everything changes, and as we reviewed your history, your family history, it was clear that so many things played a part in why people did the things that they did. And Grandpa Benny, who was the son of Joseph,
yes,
he himself was one of four. Of course, at that time they were living in Bayonne. He went through all the Bayonne school systems, and your dad told us that he also went to the University of Michigan. And did you find that? Did you know that?
I didn't know that my grandfather went to the University of Michigan. I actually thought that my dad may have been the first generation to graduate college. So it was very surprising that, number one, that my grandfather graduated college, and number two, that it was my dad's alma mater. So U of Michigan was always something really special in our house, because my dad had been a graduate and a big fan of all of U of Michigan sports, and it's a big sports school. But to know as of today,
isn't
that it was also my grandfather who had gone, it's just it's a really nice thing to know.
Well, I think in the conversation that we've had, talking to your dad and planning the show, and knowing how interesting it is when you look at families and family lineages that go through a city. I mean, your family's been here for over 100 years, and they were part of the Bayonne school systems. Your dad also said that when Grandpa Benny went to the University of Michigan, he said there were many people from Bayonne that went there with him. So it would be interesting if there are people listening who also say, you know what, I remember that my grandfather went to the University of Michigan. They must have been friends. And when you think about it, it once again shows you what a small, tight-knit community Bayonne is.
That's one of the things that when I started my practice, it wasn't even a choice. I knew that I was going to come to Bayonne because of the feeling that I had growing up as a kid. My dad had an insurance agency here, which was his father's.
Exactly.
And as a kid, I'm one of 5 girls. When we would come in, my dad would have these Christmas parties or any kind of holiday party, and we would come in, and a lot of people would be there, and I used to think that this was the coolest town that I had ever seen, that everybody knew everybody. And when I came in as a little girl, and we would go in to Burke's Bar, which was a luncheonette at the time, and my dad used to talk about this one waitress who would remember every single person's order, down to the drink, down to what they were eating, didn't write anything down, and brought everybody's lunch, exactly who ordered it, to which seat. And I remember walking down the street with my dad, and everybody would say, "Hey, Donnie, hey, Donnie, hey, Donnie." And I thought, what a place, what a place to be. And it was just always my first and only choice to sort of follow in my dad's footsteps and have a business here.
Well, I would imagine that having the name established such a long time ago, too. I mean, I've been in your office, and I've seen people come in, and everyone always says, "How's your dad? How's he doing?" And it just seems like the familiarity of families knowing one another. There's a trust level that also develops, that I always like to bring that about whenever I'm doing any one of my shows. I like to talk about how a small tight-knit community, even though it changes. I mean, as we went through your history, there were changes that came about throughout your family. I mean, there were wars that influenced the change in people's lives. Your dad told us that NATO started taking, when he was in the service, he was he was in the Korean War, had just started, yes, and he
was sent to France.
Was sent to France because at that time NATO was taking the soldiers, and he didn't go to Korea, but he was sent to France instead because they were then bringing soldiers to Europe.
Yes.
And throughout the history and throughout the things he told us, there was always a war that seemed to come up that changed the destiny of different people in ways that nowadays, you know, we're hearing the stories, and because it seems like it's only happening in our generation, that's not the case at all. You know, that's always influenced the development of families and careers, and I guess where people decided to live. But your dad did tell us that Grandpa Benny, he started his insurance agency in 1923. Believe it or not. Oh my goodness, it's almost 100 years ago. And then your dad, when he came back from the service, he decided to go into business with his own dad. So then Donald, which is your dad's name, started in the insurance business, and he worked together with his dad until his dad retired. I think he said his dad retired in 1965. And then your dad bought into the business with him, and then they worked together. And then obviously somewhere along the line you popped up.
It's funny, it wasn't a plan to, I obviously I went to law school and I worked for a firm, and I did that for a while, and then I just decided to go out on my own. My dad had already retired by then. He had sold his business, so someone else was in the office space, and I had broached the idea that I want to start my own practice.
Okay.
And
were there other choices of towns that you know at that time, or?
Well, there was always the choice of, you know, when my parents were first married, they were in Bayonne.
Okay.
And they lived in a small apartment. And it was funny because when I lived in Bayonne, apparently it was around the corner from where I used to live, was where their apartment was when they were married.
And the house that I sold, your dad grew up in.
Yes.
Okay.
And he grew up in that house.
Wow.
So I used to live on 36th Street, and he lived on the corner of 36 and Avenue C.
Okay.
When they were first married. But I grew up in a town in Springfield, and so when I was deciding about an office, you can always choose a town where I went to high school, or should I choose a town where my dad had grown up as a child, had a business for over 40 years, and it just made more sense to try my luck in Bayonne.
Okay.
And ironically, since I renovated the space, I used to have, before I renovated, I was in the front of the office. And now that we renovated, I now moved my private office to the rear of the office. And I am in the exact same corner office
oh my goodness,
that my dad was in.
Wow.
For over 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
And so I feel that there's such amazing karma in the office itself, in the address, in the space, because my dad always, and to this day, was and is the most generous, honest, mensch of a man that you could ever meet. And so if I can have, you know, this much of the goodness that he had all those years and still possesses, then I feel really lucky.
Well, that's, I mean, it's not only a space. I mean, it's not only a place where you show up every day. It seems to me, and of course, if you believe in spirit and you believe in karma and you believe in things like that, it's interesting to step into that office and look at the pictures of your grandfather and your great grandfather, which
and
are
my father.
And your father, to see the entire to see all of them there in place. And the pictures alone really have a bit of an energy too, because they do draw you in and make you feel very welcome and very comfortable.
Thank you.
And I kind of wanted people to know about that and understand that, because everybody's talking about how everything's changing and everybody's leaving. If I hear that one more time, everybody's not leaving. You know, people are staying, and we need to know who they are. We need to know why they choose to stay. There's one interesting part of your office, though, that's new, that I don't think has ever been there before, and it's over by the copy machine. You've set up a little area. If you can tell us a little bit about that.
So, speaking of generations,
Okay.
My two little boys, William and Oliver, were born in Bayonne. So this is the 5th generation of Hockstein
Okay.
in Bayonne, and they saw the office recently when it was all renovated, and we set up a little kids corner, not only for my kids, but of course people that come with kids, and to entertain them and to have a place where they can go and the adults can sit and do the work, and the kids can feel comfortable and safe, and maybe even a little fun would be good. So it's a little unique. You don't necessarily see that all the time.
Exactly.
But I think that we, in designing the space, I had a designer. It was really important to me that it felt as comfortable and as relaxed as possible, and welcoming. And we've gotten, you know, a great response in terms of clients that walked in and friends that walked in and family, and even my boys. So.
Well, I was there for the grand opening / cocktail party / delicious catered food from Mona Lisa, well, from a restaurant in town. And I watched your dad explaining to your boys what the pictures on the walls were all about. And there was a picture of Double Hill, of course, and he talked to them about that and about sleigh riding down Double Hill. And then he showed them the picture of the DeWitt. I don't think he got into the history as much, but it's something you definitely have to do now. And it's wonderful to see that continuity, and to see young children looking up to their grandfather who's explaining to them, well, this is what it was like and this is how it is, and for them to see you as their mom providing an older space but giving it a new, seeing Bayonne through new eyes, and encouraging us to know that, yeah, there are families here, there are people coming in with their children. You know, it's once again not unlike when Grandpa Joseph came over and said, I need to find a place for my family. And he came here, and my goodness, here we are still talking about him over 100 years later.
And I think that's so important. I think about, that's what I want to remind people about Bayonne, that there's a really special heritage. I couldn't imagine having my practice not in Bayonne. I just couldn't imagine it. I feel really, really lucky to have a practice here, to carry on a heritage that in my family alone began over 100 years ago, with direct lineage to significant buildings and businesses in Bayonne, and people that made a difference in town, and people that were wonderful, wonderful individuals. And to look at my little boys' faces and see and know and hear about Bayonne is really important. And that's what I want to bring back to life about Bayonne. That's why I put so much money into the office, because I believe in Bayonne, and I want people to know that when they walk into the space, that this is not, I don't want people leaving and going somewhere else to do what they can do in Bayonne.
Exactly.
And Bayonne can come back. Bayonne is still here, and we have a fantastic heritage.
Well, yours is one of many that I think it would be an interesting thing to have a day where people did spend a little bit of time thinking about how they got here and why they came here and why their families are here, and how in many instances the family home, which I mean, I know you deal with real estate, and how difficult it is sometimes when a person comes in and says this is the family home and it's time to sell, and you counsel them, because I've heard you do it. And it's you know, that certainly isn't part of what I guess a lawyer is supposed to do, but it's the feeling that you give them that, you know, it's going to be okay. We have to mention Courtney. We can't not talk about the law firm and not talk about Courtney.
Courtney Vilas.
Yes.
You know, 2 thumbs up.
Exactly.
She's my girl. She's been with me for 12 years. Mm-hmm. She has a little girl now.
Exactly. And Sophia and your boys and Sophia all played together, and that was such an interesting thing to see as well.
Yeah. And you know, I am so grateful. I am so lucky for Courtney. Mm-hmm. And
Bayonne High School girl?
Bayonne High School girl.
Okay.
Bayonne born and bred.
Okay.
And it's hard to get someone more special than Courtney.
Absolutely true.
And there's no one as bright.
And the feeling of warmth and comfort that she gives to a client who might be a little bit distressed over certain issues that come up, because we know with real estate it can get a little tricky. But it's something that people don't realize when they enter into that realm of selling or buying, that it becomes such a welcome choice.
It's a stressful thing to buy a house, especially with the banks are difficult. Appraisals have been difficult. Hurricane Sandy.
Well, that's one of the things that we were going to try to talk about a little bit, is what's happening with our flood zone maps and what's been happening as a result, not only of Sandy. I mean, it seems like we're in a weather patterns and changes that have influenced. It's influenced our border of. I mean, we're surrounded by water, and now let's face facts here. You know, we did have some areas that did run into some problems, and how have you found? Will we be right? Will there be new laws, do you think?
Well, there's definitely, you know, FEMA's going to come out with new flood maps, and I believe that it's going to be, if it's not by the end of this year, it's certainly going to be by early 2014. And I think what's going to happen is that they're going to rezone, and homes that weren't in a flood zone may find themselves in a flood zone pattern, and lenders are going to find themselves having to tell these buyers or borrowers at that point, because they own it, that they're going to have to maintain flood insurance, and that's going to be an expensive proposition. And that's what we're finding right now. We're in this pattern, sort of a holding pattern, that before FEMA remaps it and designates flood zones, we have buyers that are a little worried that, well, this house may only cost me $1,000 in insurance this year, but if we get remapped and designated in a flood zone, it's going to cost me $2,000 next year. And how do I make that up over $100 a month that I'm going to be the mortgage company's going to collect in an escrow account? So
you're going to be budgeting, and you have to budget knowing that there probably will be an increase.
And yes, and the other thing is that you almost have to be careful to counsel your client that they may want to obtain flood insurance regardless of the zone, because so many people and so many homes were destroyed, and so many people did not carry insurance because it wasn't mandatory. They were not designated in a flood zone, and they weren't insured.
Exactly.
For their losses.
Exactly.
So Bayonne, where we have an issue with water, we have an issue with some flooding in basements for sure. As you said, we're surrounded by water. I think it's not a bad idea to have the security of saying, what's a flood policy that I can buy, so that if my home gets hit by a storm, I'm going to be covered. My biggest investment that I made, of all my savings, of all my family memories and personal belongings, that I can at least replace those monetarily.
Well, an awful lot of Bayonne real estate too is owned by original owners or quote unquote people that could have been there 50 or 60 years, so they don't have mortgages anymore. And
Right.
usually, I mean, when you have a mortgage, you have to have flood insurance. So if you don't have, I do have clients who don't have a mortgage, so they're like, why would I need flood insurance? And I'm like, well, it's a minimal amount of money. If you've never had it, it's really only a couple $100s, but at least it will insure you if that should happen again. So that's, you know, it's interesting how we're rethinking, once again, not unlike Grandpa Joseph or Grandpa Benny or the Donald, you know, rethinking, and you with your beautiful renovation of your building, we're just rethinking how things have to happen, and that change is always obvious and evident, and it can be fun and can be exciting, but to be informed, I think, is the best thing.
And I think that the more that if we're adequately insured and we're aware of FEMA's changes, and we have security.
Exactly.
And security is part of being happy. It's knowing that, you know, no matter what's going to happen, I know that my kids are going to be safe, and I know that my home can be restored or replaced, and I know that I'm protected. And that's you know, that's really the basis of having insurance, and certainly in this instance, flood insurance.
So can we get the Donald to come back?
To insurance.
To insurance.
I
Think
mean,
about
we certainly grew up knowing how important every aspect of insurance. We still hear about it.
I would imagine.
So there was no insurance going on in our generations down the line. It's a really important
I want to
aspect.
thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Diane.
The time flew by, which it always does. We usually have some type of a snack or food here. This time it was food for thought. That's what we want to leave everyone with. We want you to think a little bit about the things we talked about. Talk to your own families. Let's kind of talk a little bit more about Bayonne history, about the people that are here, the people that are still here, where they came from and settled here to make it the wonderful town that it is. I hope that we continue to see wonderful things over at the Hockstein law firm, which I'm sure we will. And I really hope that in the future we can continue to see our city grow, and for our lawyers and our professionals to be as caring as you are.
Thank you.
Because you really are a very special woman, and you know how I feel about that.
Thank you.
And you know, I look forward to coming back and helping out as in any way that I can.
Well, you've been you know, put yourself in that Bayonne office and at the Hockstein office, because you've been such a huge help to me over these years.
Much.
You really have.
Thank you so much.
And I appreciate your generosity and your helping hand, and you've been a great friend.
Well, I'm happy to be your
appreciate
friend, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, and hopefully we'll see you again real soon. Love Bayonne. I'm telling you, I love Bayonne. She loves Bayonne. You can love Bayonne too.